What's up, guys? I'm Laura from Reading in Bed, and this is going to be the literary fiction book tag, which was created by Jasmine Reads. Hopefully I have the channel name right. I'm going to make very good use, hopefully, of the description box to list, Jasmine's actual channel name, other people's channels that I've watched, linking to tweets I'm going to reference and all that kind of stuff, because even though I'm going off of notes here, I already know, because I already filmed this and it just didn't go very well, that there's a lot. So do look at the description box if you want any details or any links or anything like that, and I'll just try to be somewhat succinct here. So with this tag, I'm going to spend most of the time on the very first question, which is basically to define literary fiction. The subsequent 7 questions are mostly about naming books that fit various aspects of literary fiction. And for those, I will do those. I'm going to run through them fairly quickly. And I think what I'm going to do is just mention classics, because I went through and tried to name a classic example and a contemporary example, but I think I just might go with the classics because, I don't know, why not, just to be different. So anyways, we'll get to that in a sec, but as far as defining literary fiction, okay, so I have to be careful with this, because I think it was just a couple weeks ago that Colm Toibin, of all people, almost got canceled for talking shit about genre fiction and saying how, all he's interested in reading is literary fiction. And he didn't even say that genre fiction was bad. He just said he didn't like it. And yeah, he's, getting canceled and all that. So I'm going to be careful here. But actually, the more I thought about what my definition would be, the farther away I got from comparing literary fiction to very defined genres such as mystery, horror, romance. And I went more towards comparing it to what I would call commercial fiction. And just to put the disclaimer out there, I read commercial fiction. I like commercial fiction. I've talked about Sophie Kinsella on this channel many times before, and she's not a guilty pleasure or an ironic fave. I do like Sophie Kinsella and a lot of things that are considered chick lit. So just to put that out there. But when I think about defining literary fiction, I do think about it more in opposition to commercial fiction than to, other genres. So, and I guess where I started with my definition was what kind of feelings books that we call literary fiction bring up as opposed to others. And the first way it came to me was that they're books that make me sad, but in a good way, as opposed to other genres that, maybe are supposed to make you scared or make you happy or make you laugh or, make you sort of feel heart warmed. Is that a feeling? Sad, but in a good way. But then I watched Jay Shay's version of this video, and the way he put it, although it wasn't him, it was him quoting someone who was quoting someone else, and there might have even been a third layer of quoting in there. The way he put it, though, was a consolation, that you feel a sense of consolation, and that says it a lot better. So I think in terms of feelings and emotional impacts, literary fiction is something that makes me feel that sense of consolation, sort of that, yeah, I don't know, that sense of someone else feels the same way I do, or, yeah, things are really bad, but, at least someone can express it in a really beautiful way, or, stuff like that. I don't know. The more I say it, the worse it's getting. So I'll cut off that line of, that line of inquiry, but consolation is one part of it. The second part of it for me is room for interpretation. And that's really where it comes down to drawing a line between literary and commercial and other genres. For me, literary fiction leaves a lot more room for interpretation. It sort of asks more of me as a reader. It sort of requires me to put some effort in order to get more out of it, or to get the things I want to get out of it. So again, that's not to say obviously any book you read requires some level of interpretation, but what I find with commercial fiction is that often the themes or the message or whatever you want to call it is telegraphed in a very obvious way, or even the plot points are foreshadowed in a very obvious way. Character arcs go in literally an arc, right? You can kind of see the journey happening and the climax and some sort of redemption and, whatever, all those sort of standard standard story arcs and character arcs. Like, you can see them, you can feel them. Again, it's not a bad thing. Sometimes I like that. Sometimes I'm looking for that. But with literary fiction, there's usually some attempt to subvert some of that stuff. There's some room for me as a reader to decide what I think the message or the theme of the book is, or even if there needs to be one. Like, maybe the message is there is no message. Maybe the message is just that life is weird and chaotic and messy. And also room for me as a reader to decide, like, whether characters are good or bad, or again, maybe to decide that doesn't matter and who cares. Because again, I find in more commercial fiction, it's often like, you know, there are good guys and bad guys. Now, sometimes the bad guys will become good guys because they are redeemed in some way, but it's like very kind of spoon-fed. Whereas I would say more literary fiction kind of leaves that up to you. Leaves that up to you to decide. Leaves that to your experience and the other things you've read and the experiences you've had to sort of shape that and determine that. So yeah, that is my definition, I guess. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there was anything else I wanted to say. I was going to get into a bit of a rant. I don't think I will. Like, Steve Donahue had a very good rant in his version of this tag. The only thing I could rant about is that I find a lot of, I mean, even things that are classified as literary fiction, but certainly things that are more on the commercial side, to be so obviously an author who wants to, like, put an opinion out there or sort of say, you know, this is what I think is right or whatever. And it's like, why don't you just write an essay? Like, honestly, there are a lot of novels out there that can and should be essays. So with good literary fiction, I think you don't go down that road. You aren't writing an essay. You're kind of like, yeah, you're more in conversation with the reader, I guess. That's a bit of a cliche, but I don't think I'm going to do much better than that. But yeah, if you want to see a full-on rant, do watch Steve rail against the upper middle class Connecticut divorce novels and the Nigerian immigrant novels and all this stuff, which was funny because then the two examples he decided to rant about were neither of those things. He talked about There by Tommy Orange and Stay With Me, which were both literary fiction novels that I've read too, and I agree they were super overhyped, but he's going down the rant road. The other version of this tag I did want to mention was Mark Nash. I really liked his definition, and Claire had a really good version. A lot of people had good versions, and now that I'm saying that, I just realized I didn't say who tagged me because they all had good versions too. So I'll just do that and then we'll move on. So Rick from Another Book Vlog, Alex from What Page Are You On, and Eric from Lonesome Reader, some of my very favorite booktubers, and they all had wonderful versions of this tag too. The definition part is definitely what has interested me the most. So that said, let's go into all the other questions, and I think I'm going to talk about classics. I might mention my contemporary ones too. Let's see. So, question number 2 is to name a literary fiction novel with a brilliant character study. So my classic example was Villette by Charlotte Bronte, simply because it's a book that leaves you just kind of like drowning in this person's mind. Like, you're just so deep inside their consciousness. You do feel sort of like disconnected from the real world when you finish reading it, or at least I did, as opposed to like other contemporary-ish authors like, dare I say, Jane Austen. Love Jane Austen books. Well, I love some of them, let's say, but I never get that feeling of being like so close to the characters that I get from a Charlotte Bronte novel, and particularly Villette. Question number 2 is a literary fiction novel with experimental writing. So my classic example was Moby-Dick. I mean, for the cetology chapter alone, which is just basically a list of whale facts, but somehow it works. My contemporary answer for this one was The Wake by Paul Kingsnorth, because he invented his own language in which to write the book. I mean, it's based on Old English, but it's a modified version. That one, I remembered that just because I think that was the one Steve Donahue used as well, so that was kind of cool. And I liked what, I think it was Mark Nash in his tag where he said that stream of consciousness is not experimental, and I totally agree. Like, how long have people been writing stream of consciousness? So to me, that ain't it. Duck's Newburyport could very well be, because it's like one sentence over 1,000 pages, but I'm gonna have to wait till the fall to read that one. So anyways, question number 4 is a literary fiction novel with an interesting structure. Lots of contemporary examples of this, including all of Anakana Shofield's novels, especially her latest one, Bina, which is, we're meant to understand that the character is writing out sort of her list of warnings on the backs of receipts and things. So in the book, like, the margins are very narrow. She also is a big user of footnotes and things like that. My classic example, though, was Wuthering Heights, and hear me out, because I know like frame narrative is not really that interesting in terms of structure, but coming from someone who's read Wuthering Heights like probably at least 10 times, every time I read it, I forget how big that frame story is, and that there's really kind of 2 frames. Like, there's Lockwood and there's Nellie, and then there's like the 2 generations. And you'd think, having been like sort of reading this book off and on since I was a teenager, I would remember, but every time it feels new and fresh somehow. So yeah, I'm just giving a shout out to Wuthering Heights for having, let's say, a really good frame structure. Whether or not it's interesting, I guess, is up to you. Question number 5 is a literary fiction novel that explores social themes. For some reason, I had trouble thinking of one contemporary, which is like weird. Even for classics, I don't know, because I mean, you know, like, this is something that like gets made fun of, that a lot of literary fiction novels are just sort of like, you know, like issue novels, right? But the ones I eventually came up with for classic, I came up with Cecelia by Frances Burney, simply because it's such an early example of a feminist novel that, you know, from the 18th century, that I think it deserves to be there. I mean, obviously a lot of it doesn't quite apply to today, but some of it does. Yeah, some of it still does. So for contemporary, I went with My Year of Rest and Relaxation, just because it's the best 9/11 novel I've ever read. And of course, one of my favorites in recent years, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, for its look at animal rights and animal rights activism, without hammering you over the head with it, even though, like, it kind of does, but it doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I've talked about that book a lot on this channel, though, so do check it out. Question 6 is a literary fiction novel that explores the human condition. I mean, they all do, right? Like, with all of these, any book that I really love, that I would give 5 stars or whatever, would fit for all of these. So yeah, I had trouble with this one too, just because I'm like, well, like, they all do. The contemporary one I came up with was Days Without End by Sebastian Barry, which I think at least 1 or 2 other people have mentioned in this tag before, which was really great to see, because I think, even though I think it was shortlisted for the Booker, it sort of didn't, like, the hype didn't sustain past that, and I really think it should. It's like an incredible book. And I listed it for the human condition simply because I felt like I recognized so much. It felt so authentic, even though the main character has, like, literally nothing in common with me at all. Time, circumstance, personality, anything. So, you know, a lot of times we talk about relating to characters. I don't relate to him, but I felt like the authenticness of, you know, who he was, I guess you could say. Yeah, I couldn't really think of a good classic. The classic example I wrote down was Infinite Jest. Don't at me. But, you know, David Foster Wallace had a famous quote about, like, that fiction is about what it's like to be a fucking human being, or something, you know, something along those lines. But I mean, it's true, so I'll give that to him. Okay, so we're moving out of the name a single book questions. Thank goodness, because I really struggled with them. Question 7 is to name a brilliant literary hybrid novel. What the heck did I... Okay, so this is one more. Sorry, naming individual books. So what I came up with was Flights by Olga Tokarczuk for contemporary, because it's a kind of a mishmash of a whole bunch of different genres and types of books. And for classic, I came up with War and Peace simply because I know that Tolstoy had said, like I think he wrote in a foreword or a prologue or something, that he did not consider War and Peace to be a novel. He considered it to be like just a totally different form. So yeah, War and Peace. And the very last question is, what genre do you wish was mixed with literary fiction more often? Now, I've made a whole video and a whole blog post about how I want more literary smut in my life. So, you know, I'm kind of like straddling the line between romance and erotica here. You could say a bit of both. But yeah, I mean, so I've talked about that a lot. So what I wanted to say for this answer was nonfiction, which actually the two books I named, Flights and War and Peace, kind of fit that, like where they are novels and they are very literary, but they are drawing on real life in a lot of cases. With War and Peace, obviously, with like all the battles and the fact that Napoleon is a character. In Flights, some of the pieces are like obviously just made up in short stories, but some of them are based on historical stuff. So I guess it's that like historical fiction, but veering more towards not creative nonfiction. Like, I don't even know, but there's something about nonfiction and literary fiction that is kind of interesting to me. Even like I'm reading Say Nothing right now, which is straight up nonfiction, but it's told in a very literary manner. Like it's building a lot of tension, and you know, there's character arcs and storylines, you know, kind of coming together. So something in that vein between, you know, what something like Say Nothing is doing and something like War and Peace is doing and something like Flights is doing. I don't know what you would call that, but that's what I'd like to see, in addition to the literary smut, because I want to see that too. Okay, so that is it. This is getting long, so as far as tagging people goes, I'll try to do that in the description box, but you know, consider yourself tagged. These are really, really entertaining to watch, and particularly for the definitions. Everyone is so smart and came up with so many good things, and well, hopefully you got something good out of this too. Thanks for watching.